You look sexy, baby. I've been waiting for you all day.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome. This is I'm Greg Jaber. This is the Edwood Summit podcast. We're into the early 30s now, so we've been doing these podcasts for quite a while. And I have to say unequivocally, and this is not to besmirch anybody who's joined me on previous podcasts, including Rob Huffman, who's here today, has joined me on a few podcasts previously, but this is certainly, an epic event for Edwood aficionados everywhere, and more so for, as you can probably see, Casey Larrain has joined us here today, which is absolutely a privilege for me. I don't want to speak for Rob, but I asked Rob to join us as well because it was nearly 2 years back that he actually introduced me to Casey. So I want to obviously thank him for that. And I don't need to say any words in introduction to all of you Edwood fans out there about who Casey Larrain is, but I want to throw it over to you, Casey. Any kind of opening words you want to say before we jump into I know what will be a fun conversation.
Oh, okay. Well, not really. I can't imagine that there weren't all sorts of other people who would be so much more familiar to Ed Wood fans than I. It's entirely possible, on the other hand, that most of those people are long dead, of course, died of old age. But okay. Ask away.
Well, you'd be surprised how many films have been unearthed over the past couple years. So people might be more acquainted with you than as these things come out on DVD, and some of them are in better resolution than they probably ever were when they were screened.
Rob,
so
I can't remember. Are you the very nice person who sent me the video of nymphocyclers?
I don't believe it was me. I think it was someone else, but we had talked about that time because I was working on
Andrew
a book.
Rausch, maybe it was him. Do you know him? That
name sounds familiar.
He did interview me also. It was somebody who had an interview and they sent that to me as a thank you. A different person sent me an Ed Wood book called Killer and Drag.
That was probably me.
Yeah, okay, so you were that one and Andrew was the other, the nymphocyclers. Okay.
Yeah, that probably came actually from the collection that the estate has. So it was once owned by Kathy Wood, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah. That's, you had told me that. Okay. Well, I read it.
It's fun stuff. Now you have to read the sequel.
Oh, really?
So it's been a couple years. Yes, it is. It's been a couple years since we spoke. I was, working on a book, and at the time you hadn't seen any of your films. Has that changed since we last spoke?
Well, I did finally work up the courage. Not 2022, I think in 2021, on my birthday, I figured, well, okay, just suck it up and watch it. I will say it wasn't as bad as I thought it might be, quite. One of the things, on that package, it says, and the lost films of Casey Larrain. You have watched this, right? This DVD. Those really aren't my films at all. Those were just films in which I did appear in some very minor way. So that was the part really that I had been more looking forward to, is seeing what they had dug up in terms of lost films. But
sure. So I assume you're talking about Nymphocycler that had the other videos attached. See, you hitched your wagon to Ed Wood, and you're the most renowned person on the other film. So you ended up being packaged together. So that you have a starring role, unlike the other two films in which you have a smaller role. Now that you've seen the film, do you recognize any of your co-stars?
No, no, I really don't at all. People who have interviewed me over the past several years have said, well, you worked with this person a couple of times, or you worked with that person a couple of times. Of course, I did all this work more than 50 years ago. So, you undoubtedly were not even born 50 years ago. So that's a long, long time. And I will say, at the time that I was making these films, I did not have any sort of vested interest at all in this work other than the paycheck. It was just a paycheck to me, and I was not at all part of any sort of Hollywood scene around making these films. My boyfriend and I were living in the hinterlands, where I still am, kind of close by. We were living up in a canyon community at the edge of LA County. And so I would just go into Hollywood, usually Hollywood, but they made the films all over, really. Go into work, get through the work as quickly as possible, and go home. So when people are talking about boogie nights or, something like, which I never saw, but, they're talking about all drugs and prostitution and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, that really wasn't the way it was, except, of course, I'm just talking about my own experience. Although
Sure.
I have heard that the whole drug scene tied up with these films kind of came in a little later. I never saw any drugs on a set at all. It was just very work oriented. And a lot of the women, I think, that I worked with, there were people like myself who made films over a period of time, but a number of the people that I worked with seemed much more just like hippie chicks, or somebody's girlfriend, or, the director's girlfriend, the photographer's girlfriend, who would just do it for a day or two or whatever here and there. And they weren't really in the business, so to speak. So the only people that I remember, there are several. I remember one of the Andy Warhol, quote, superstars, end quote, Viva, her name was. I worked with her on a film, and the reason I remember her is because she was such an obnoxious diva. She just thought, she was just it, and was bitching and moaning about, this and that, and, or dressing room, or, where, this is really not a Hollywood film, babe. Like, don't you realize where you are? So
I don't think we ever got to the bottom of what film that was. I remember you and I went back and forth. Go ahead, Greg. You may perhaps
I think it's Dinah East. Dinah East, which Ultraviolet is also in. I believe so. I could be totally off base on that, but
I had posited Cleopatra.
They thought it was something about Cleopatra.
Yeah, I think that might have been me. I was thinking it might have been Cleopatra, which I think there might be two titles that she was in that had Cleopatra in the title, and one of them has Christopher Walken in it. So I never did figure out which was which. I'm sure it wasn't that one. Probably not, but you never know.
I think there's the Notorious Cleopatra, directed by Pete Perry, also directed another film that you were in, Casey, The Joys of Jezebel. But you're right. There's really multiple classifications. I think there are films in which you starred, Nymphocycler being a crucial one among them.
Right.
Then there's the films in which you had a featured role, and there's films in which you're more
a very minor character.
minor character, right? Exactly. And I think they're across those three fronts. I think the
Right.
Internet Movie Database right now indexes, I think, 25 or so films that you
Oh my
appeared in,
goodness.
but there's more that
Oh,
I'm personally aware of. And I
okay.
think given that there's a lot of films that have yet to be discovered, I'm sure you were probably appeared in upwards in some capacity in upwards of 30 plus, if not 40 plus films is a sort of fair estimate,
Oh,
I
I'm
think.
sure. I'm sure
Yeah.
because I worked for a couple of years.
Hmm.
Well, and when I started uh, doing the work, I started as a print model, and then I worked for a little while doing bar loop kind of things. Do you know what those are? They used to have in topless bars. They used to show little nudie clips of things.
Yep.
Sure. Our old
naked
pal Ed Wood
women.
was into those too.
There
Yeah.
we go. Naked women rolling around on the bed,
Right.
stuff like that. Before I got, but I mean, I worked for at least a year and a half, making the longer quote story end quote films. So I'm sure I made at least 50.
Wow. So there's
It's remarkable.
lots more to be discovered then. That's awesome. Ed Wood, you had mentioned this to me, so just to it's an important point for us Ed Wood aficionados that when
Right.
you made Nymphocycler, you remember Ed being primarily the person who on set would be best described as the quote unquote director.
Well, yes, that is the way I remember it, but he was such a character. But when I watched the film, they didn't use a lot of the stuff that I shot with Ed. I mean, I think I may have mentioned to you the whole opening sequence was totally different, the way Ed shot it and the way it appeared in the film. And then film that we shot, apparently some of it did end up in some other somethings. I have no idea what, but because I think it was also you who mentioned you had seen some film on Venice Beach
Yeah.
with some
Yeah.
street people drinking. That
Well, go ahead. And I'll...
None of that film, none of that ended up in Nymphocycler. We also shot a bunch of film in Griffith Park with Ed that didn't show up in Nymphocycler. So, what happened to all that? I have no idea.
And Griffith Park was really a site that was near and dear to Ed's heart, where he shot a number of items through the years. But there are multiple versions actually of Nymphocycler. And that being said, Nymphocycler, and matter of fact, on Ed's resume, he refers to it as Misty, and we get a theme song for the film.
That was the title.
Clearly that's Misty. Yeah.
That was the title he told me when I was making the film.
Right. And now the film has turned up 10, if we go back 10 plus years, it's an unknown film and no one knows really what Misty is. And now through the miracles of discovery, realistically, there's two different versions that have been released on disc, and they're mostly the same edit. They're softcore by and large in nature with a little bit of spicier footage. We're right at the cusp of the sort of the transition era into hardcore. And then one of those versions is shorn of some of the footage that is in the other version. Then a version of that scene at Venice Beach, which actually is in the earlier cut of Nymphocycler, but cut differently. It turns up in an opening scene of a compilation film called Sex Pursuits. The curious thing there, I think I mentioned to you, is that scene, the Venice Beach scene, is intercut with hardcore footage, which looks like it's shot on a set, which I think was probably Hal Guthu's set on Santa Monica Boulevard, because there are scenes in Nymphocycler, and I don't think I've mentioned this before. This is off track perhaps for you, Casey, but for the Ed Wood fans out there, the panther painting shows up in Nymphocycler, and I only noticed this for the first time. when I saw another version recently of Nymphocycler, which came out oddly enough in the early 1980s on cassette in the United Kingdom. I finally saw that version fairly recently, and it is a different cut, a different cut of the film. But the panther painting was a set decoration, a old black velvet painting of a panther walking down a big stairway, and it turns up it's in the background. It helps identify the background set for a lot of films that were shot at Hal Guthu's studio. And I know Hal was subsequently your agent. Your first agent introduced you into the print model business, but Hal was your agent at some point a little later on.
Right. He was my agent for a long time. Well, until I stopped working.
And I recall you and I talked about, you had only met him once at the office. Otherwise, business was conducted by phone. But I was disappointed that you didn't meet Max the parrot.
Yeah.
Well, he could have been sitting in the office when I was there. I mean, I'm sure I did go into the office more than once, but almost, everything that was booked was just booked by phone. Originally, I went in to meet him, so he could see me and take photographs and stuff like that. But mostly, it was all, he would just call up and say, "Want some work?" Oh, sure.
Rob and I have been obsessing for a couple of years now, Casey, about related topics to that transitional point where the adult industry, which never existed prior as a sort of mass cultural object, where it comes into being. And you were certainly at the forefront of it, which is why it's absolutely mind-boggling for me that we're having this conversation, by the way. But Rob and I, obsessing about related items, have discovered that a lot of the folks who were involved in the early adult industry also happen to be people who wrote a lot of popular paperback fiction, including especially science fiction. And I just wonder if you came across folks in Southern California on the film scene during those couple of years who were creatively also involved in that.
Well, very possibly I did come across them, and I had no idea, really what else they were doing in terms of their professional experience.
Mm-hmm.
There were very few of the directors that I really interacted with to any great extent. You would get to the set and whoever was shooting the film would be there. Oftentimes, a lot of the movies that I made, the camera person was also the director. So he'd just be there. And Corey Allen, I do remember him, who was a legitimate director. I think you're familiar with him, I think. I worked with him on the erotic adventures of Pinocchio.
Right.
But he did a lot of television work. I don't know. I think he did a little bit of film work, but he did a lot of television work. And my younger brother, who was an actor for a while, worked with him on a couple of TV things.
Right.
And he said, "Oh, I know your sister."
This
okay.
makes me think of too many tangents all at once, but sticking with the Pinocchio film, that also initially released as "quote unquote" voluptuary, and there are newspaper ads and posters to that effect. Casey knows this, but I've been trying to buy a poster of a Casey Larrain film for a little while now, and they skyrocket, and my bids are surpassed. But I won't give up. I won't give up. But
But yeah, to your point, Greg, Neola Graff, who goes by a different name these days, she was kind of like a self-described, as Casey put it, hippie chick. And she was friends, her husband was friends with a person that was involved in the sci-fi scene, but was also shooting Nudie Cuties early on. And I'm spacing on the names, Greg, but you know who I mean.
William
But she was in a lot of
Rotsler.
your films as well. Yes.
William Rotsler, and he actually directed Street of a Thousand Pleasures, which you have one of the smaller roles in. So
Have you
it's
ever
all
seen that film?
okay.
Have you
I've
ever
been meaning. I have, and I've been meaning, and I'm so sorry. This is off topic perhaps, but I promised Casey a little while ago that I would send her a bunch of discs of her films if she would like to review them. And I
But when you
have been
saw The
remiss.
Street of a Thousand Pleasures, did you see that orgy scene that I was in?
There are multiple. Street of a Thousand Pleasures is pretty much composed of pretty much one long orgy.
Or another?
Yeah, kind of
Okay,
in past the sort of baton fashion. And
okay,
so yeah, because you were talking about how you remember being on a film that was a SAG film.
right, right. Just the one.
But you were never interested, as you mentioned, in getting a SAG card. It was just an offshoot of modeling for you.
Well, yes, I mean, I had been making films for a while at that point. And as I recall, I got paid less money for this SAG film than for the regular work, that I was
Yeah,
doing. So,
that's
I
interesting.
mean, I was not interested at all at that time in becoming an actress per se. We did have to get up on that film. I mean, I just sort of would be interested to see it just for the overall look of it. Because we had to get there at, I don't know, 6 in the morning or some hideous time. And they actually had a makeup person and a hairdresser and a costume person and all that stuff. I think I may have sent you a copy of a little photograph that was a
Yeah.
continuity photograph, because it was shot, the scene I was in was shot over 2 days. And so we had to come back the next day at 6 o'clock in the morning and go through the whole hair and makeup and all that kind of stuff.
There were a few films like Street of a Thousand Pleasures that had large casts and a lot of group scenes and a lot of sort of colorful, exotic sort of backgrounds.
Right.
So I want to, I don't want to opine and say it was specifically that film. That being said, Street of a Thousand Pleasures is I think a great fun, colorful film and very very nicely shot. There's a film, and I think I asked you about it, but it's probably for me the starring role of the films available to us thus far. Again, confident that we're going to find more of your films. Le Femme Libido, where you were the main character, and it starts out with you walking down a sidewalk, looking in a picture window, and it gets into the psychology of your character in a significant way. Yeah, it's a sex film from I think 71, but I think it's a wonderful film, and you give a great performance in it.
For the most, I've never really seen any of my films. But that somehow I would like to see that one because it doesn't sound at all familiar. It would be interesting to see if it jogged any memories. I don't know.
It's funny that you've worked with many different directors, but Ed Wood was someone who you remember fondly, unlike some people you just, like you said, you don't remember your co-stars or the director because it was just like
Right.
in and out. And you've even mentioned some of the various films for Ed Wood you thought were the same film because it was like you were back working with Ed Wood and you weren't sure if, at the time what was going on. And if you think about it, something like Misty, aka Nymphocycler, and Love Feast, which is also called a photographer. He's a photographer in both of those.
That one I remember that one.
So I can see how they can be conflated. Yeah. But could you tell us about your motorcycle riding, why you were cast in this film? Because you obviously knew how to ride.
Well, I mean, I just used to ride for transportation. Like I say, we lived up in the hills in northwestern LA County. And so I would have to go a distance to get into work. And I actually learned to ride a bike before I learned to drive a car. That was just my form of transportation. And so I think it was Hal, when Ed was looking for somebody to be in this film. And at that point in time, I no longer had my own motorcycle. my ex-husband, who I adore, by the way, I don't want you to get the wrong idea, but he sold it out from under me, my motorcycle, because I had this teeny tiny little accident. And he was always afraid I was going to kill myself on it. So he sold it anyway. So, but when Ed was casting the film, he was talking to Hal, and Hal said, "Oh, I have somebody who knows how to ride a bike, who could do this for you."
And so somewhere early on, in your IMDb thing, it's there's a role that says motorcycle girl. So you'd probably ridden in other pictures as well.
That's in the film, Rob. I Want More, one of Casey's very, very earliest pictures. Yeah, where she does in fact ride a motorcycle on the second story balcony in the interior of a very large, ornate Southern California mansion. It's a real cool
Nice.
scene.
Really?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Really?
I have no memory of that at all either.
That's awesome.
Oh no.
So where did the motorcycle come from that's in the film, since yours was taken away?
That there's a group of people in the film who were bikers. They were a club. I won't say a gang exactly. I mean, I think they were nicer than a gang, but they were a club. And so I was riding the motorcycle of one of the women in the club. I think the fellow who I ended up becoming romantically attached to, the one who gets beat up by Ed.
Sure, the Norwegian sailor.
Yes, I think very possibly it was his girlfriend's bike.
So he was from the not the gang, but the club, the motorcycle club. That actor.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
So one thing I recall is now you've seen the film, but when we had talked, you hadn't, and but one thing you had remembered was a screening of the dailies.
Right.
Somewhere.
Right.
If you could tell us about that, because that's probably something no one's heard about.
Well, Ed just invited all of the people who were in the film to a screening, like you say, of the dailies after all the film had been shot, or after all the film we knew about had been shot. And my recollection is that it was in a bar in North Hollywood, that it sort of set up as a screening room, moved the regular tables and set up benches where the tables would be facing probably the bar area. And everybody had paper cups and he was pouring jug wine into the paper cups. And so we were all drinking wine. And
so the jug wine made a return from the shoot.
That's right, from Venice Beach. I said I never saw any drugs on the set, but the wine on Venice Beach, that was actual wine. I'm sure I got rather tipsy. But yeah, we watched the dailies, and to the best of my recollection, which is obviously suspect, I don't think there was any sound.
That makes sense.
Just the video, no sound.
There's a lot of voiceovers in the film. Do you remember being in a booth or anything recording voiceovers?
That was not me.
Oh,
that voiceover was not me.
That's interesting.
No, yeah.
I think, and talking about Nymphocycler, of course, the reputed director at some point along the way, some people had seized on the notion that it was Joseph F. Robertson. The IMDb does not actually agree with that now, and I think it's partly based on your testimony that Edward directed all the scenes that you were in. Rob, perhaps that's like, we have the guy here actually. How amazing is that? The guy who cleaned up the IMDb listing to make it more accurate. That being said, Joseph F. Robertson is on Ed's resume. He lists Misty parenthetically as a Joseph F. Robertson production.
Yeah,
But
he probably
I
just
think,
produced it, huh?
right. So numerous films, Love Feast being one of them. There's other films that are credited to Joseph F. Robertson as director that you appeared in, like Lord Farthingay's Holiday and Caught in the Can is now attributed to him. But it seems like Joseph F. Robertson was sort of strictly the producer. And
well, no, I think it's possible he may have shot little parts. The part where my bike breaks down on Malibu Canyon and I'm picked up by a couple of lesbians. I think he shot that part.
It was a team effort, or
Yeah.
he was, or at least was shooting it.
Yeah.
Could it have been his bar? I think it was called Surfer Girl. That was where the dailies were screened.
I was thinking the same.
Very possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, very possibly. As I say, and I feel very apologetic about this, but as I say, my memories of all this stuff are for the most part either non-existent, or just so vague after, 54 years or whatever. It is 54 years. Oh my goodness.
Understandably, you don't need to, of course, be apologetic about that. Understandably, more so, we are talking about a period of about a year and a half, 2 years or so. So there's so much beyond that. So I'm curious, what ultimately led you to leave that behind, and what did you move on to next?
Well, I basically left it behind because, as you probably are aware, when I started, everything was totally soft core.
Yeah.
There were all these rules about what you could show or couldn't show. You couldn't show an erect penis. When I first started doing the bar films, you could touch your breasts. You could, I think, sort of have your fingers play around your pubic hair, but you would not actually touch your vagina. And so, well, you see in Nymphocycler, all of these guys laying around with naked girls, and they all have soft penises. I was watching it, I kept thinking, what the hell are you going to do with that, fella? Like, oh no. So, but then, okay, then they graduated. You could show erect penises, you could show women playing with themselves, totally whatever, and it was just kind of moving farther and farther. And then seemingly very suddenly, everything was hardcore.
Yeah.
And so rudely, not that this would have made a big difference to me personally, but so rudely, they're paying exactly the same money for hardcore as, they had been paying for softcore. I just really did not want to do that. So I didn't work for a while. And then something came up in my romantic relationship. And seemingly I was going to have to, just set up a whole nother life. So I thought, oh dear, well, okay, maybe I'll just make a couple of films and make some money, just have a little nest egg or something before I go out in the world on my own. And so I did make several. I think, what was it? Adultery for Fun and Profit. That was a hardcore film. There were several others. I'm sure I told you I did work once with John Holmes.
Yeah.
That I definitely remember him. I remember, I remember that experience, and part of the reason is because the fellows who shot the film, who I remember as Vince and Al, it was these two fellows who always worked together, and I had made a couple of other films with them. But for some reason, they came up to our place in Box Canyon to sign me up for this film, which was highly unusual. I don't know if they were just in the area or something, but they stopped by our house to say they had a job they wanted me to do. And they said, you'll be working with John Holmes. And at the time, that name meant nothing to me. I mean, it's like, I think they wanted to be there, you know, to see my shocked expression or something, you know, see the horror on my face. Oh, no, not that. And so I really completely, totally let them down because I didn't know him from Adam. But then when I made the film, also, that was very memorable, basically for his professionalism. He was, when I worked with him, he was just the consummate professional. You know, they said, get a hard on. He got a hard on. You know, I mean, we were both so lubed up for this movie. And he was behind me. He's taking me from behind. So, you know, just making that whole part as easy as possible. And then they didn't want the guy apparently ever to come inside you because you can't see that. You know, so they'd always come on your body. So they told him that they wanted the cum shot, and so he pulls out and boom, you know, it's like just, okay, come now. And that was it, he did it. And afterwards this film was shot in an old theater, a legitimate theater down in downtown LA. And we went back into a dressing room to get cleaned up. And, you know, he's getting all washed and sanitized and stuff. And he's pouring mouthwash all over his cock. Which I was just thinking, God, doesn't that hurt? You know, but okay, wants to make sure, you know, no germs. Oh dear. But then I think ultimately, didn't he end up dying of AIDS?
He did, actually.
He
That's
did.
Yeah, I didn't even connect that dot actually until you said it. Yeah, that's ironic. Well, sadly ironic. John's a good example of somebody. You mentioned you didn't see any drugs on the set, and we're talking this is as John Holmes is becoming sort of the legend at this point.
Right.
Where
Right.
and I've talked to a few other people who told me same that John was, you know, up to a point. And then there was a point beyond which, once he started doing coke, and he
Right.
became just literally a different individual. And I
Oh,
think that's the latter years, as we get deeper into the 70s, that becomes a pretty commonplace story in the
right.
adult industry where drugs really does, you know, take hold. I don't want to get negative, obviously, but that's incredible, Casey, because that is one of those films I mentioned that we have yet to discover, and I hopefully we will. Unless I'm completely wrong, I don't think I am, because that would be pretty big news. A
right.
film with
Well,
both you and John
a
Holmes.
very short little piece. You know, maybe 20 minutes in length, something like that. Like I said, it was shot in this theater. He was a magician. He played a magician, and you know, he calls for a volunteer from the audience for a show, and that's me. And you know, I go up on stage, and do some little bit of business or something, and all of a sudden it's poof, and of course my clothes all disappear. And then I don't remember how we got together, if he, if it was something I wanted to do, or he just had me mesmerized or whatever. But so, and after they got their cum shot, pretty much that was the end of the whole thing. So it was very short. It was very short.
A fun fact, I think I heard that John Holmes, when he started to go down, he started drinking first, and I think he was a Scotch man, and he'd carry it in a briefcase, and I'm pretty sure Ed Wood had a bottle of Imperial in his briefcase, if not vodka on a bad day. So I always thought that was funny, that because they had potentially worked together at one point, and that they both had that habit. I always thought was kind of humorous.
Oh dear. A friend of mine years ago mentioned Ed Wood to me. And at that point, I didn't remember the name of this fellow that I worked with. But I was talking to my friend about working with a director who directed in drag. And the fellow said, "Oh, that's Ed Wood." And I said, "Oh, well, okay." I didn't remember his name, but okay, that's Ed Wood. He said he was a really handsome guy. And I said, "No, he wasn't." No, he wasn't.
So he's probably recalling like early mid 50s, Glenn or Glenda.
Johnny Depp Ed Wood.
And you remember him 15, 20 years later.
I kept saying, no, he wasn't. And finally, one day when I was at his house, he went to his bookshelf and pulled out this book. And so he's showing me these early handsome photos. Well, it turned out I was listed in the index in the back. My name was in there. I said, "But when I worked with him, he was a bloated alcoholic. A really, really nice guy, sweet, funny. I really enjoyed working with him, but he was a bloated alcoholic. He was not at all good looking." So, okay. Yeah. Happens to so many of us, unfortunately.
Casey, unlike many people, I think I recall you telling me you knew from maybe your agent that he had made films before the ones you were making with him. Do you recall that?
That at the time I knew, well, yes, Hal did when I booked the job. He did tell me this was a very well-known director. He didn't go into why he was well-known, but, very well-known director. And he told me that he had a film in the Venice Film Festival. And and it was Glenn or Glenda, and I had no idea if that actually ever had been the Venice Film Festival, but kind of hard to imagine. But
I don't think that happened. That'd be cool if it did. I don't think that happened though.
So did you know that he worked with Bela Lugosi?
Not then. No, okay. No, I didn't. Although we did talk about he and Ed and I on the set about him having worked with him and, hung out with him, that they were friends. And he told me about going out with him to nightclubs, and that Bela Lugosi was, at the point at which they were hanging out together, was such a serious addict that Ed would shoot him up periodically under the table.
Did the honors. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So you mentioned that you knew Ed had a drinking problem. Did he drink on the set?
I think he would occasionally take a little nip. He certainly never got, squiffy on the set or anything like that. But I think he usually had somewhere a little pint bottle of something that you're saying was scotch.
Actually, he liked imperial whiskey, but when times were tough,
whiskey.
he drank vodka.
Ah, okay. No, whatever he was drinking then was not vodka. It was some
Okay.
brown liquid.
It was probably imperial whiskey. It was actually featured very prominently in your movie Love Feast.
Really?
When he's overwhelmed, he goes outside and there's a big bowl of ice melting, and next to it is the imperial whiskey bottle. So do you recall that film? This is the film where as a photographer, he's tricking models to come into his house and
Yes.
disrobe.
No.
And there's a big
I
bed
do
scene.
remember that film.
Okay.
Yes. Aside from that one, all of the work basically that I did with Ed was all, to my knowledge at that point, all one film. But then afterward, it was all broken up, into all sorts of different kinds of things.
So for our viewers, it's Love Feast and Misty, aka Nymphocycler, and then also Take It Out and Trade.
Right.
I don't think you had a speaking role in that one, but you were one of the women in the brothel.
Right.
But you thought those were all just one film somehow coming together.
Yep.
That's funny.
Well, it was impossible to know what Ed was, what the final shoot was going to turn out to be, because, the way he worked was so unstructured. I don't remember there ever being a script, which was true of almost all the films that I did. You would never see a script. But
so it was just like a scenario and ad-libbed.
Right. This is what I want you to do. I was sort of assuming, since this seemed to be a slightly more legitimate film, that there would have been a script, but no, really not. This is what we want you to do, or this is what's going to be happening. And okay.
Yeah, I could see with like Take It Out and Trade, there was probably a script, but then for some scenes I could see there absolutely not being one whatsoever. What's funny is Greg and I just recently read something about Neola Graff, who was also in Love Feast, and she's in a scene that you're not in towards the end where a few women humiliate Ed, and in this article we were reading, she's like, he told us we were a coven of witches, and it doesn't come out of the film whatsoever. But that was the direction they were given, was that they were witches tormenting this poor soul.
Oh no. I see.
One thing I think Greg will get a kick out of, I recall you telling me that while you didn't know Ray Crash Corrigan, who played an ape in Bride of the Beast that was written by Ed Wood, he produced Take It Out and Trade, and you had been to his ranch, the Corriganville,
As a
when
child,
you were a kid.
Yes. Our father used to take us to Corriganville. I have pictures of my two older sisters sitting on one of their donkeys. Oh,
that's great.
Well, the hills, the area where I live, is right over the pass from where Simi Valley is, which is where Corriganville was. But the hills around here, huge granite rock hills, were used in 80 zillion different film shoots, TV westerns, and tons of westerns. If you were ever here and saw the hills just behind my apartment, you would recognize them from so many things. Yeah.
There's actually in Corriganville, so you have the street set in Corriganville, where on the weekends, they would stage Western shows for the kids and things like that. But right on the hill overlooking it, a very fabled sort of piece of geology they call Gorilla Rock. It looks like the face of a gorilla coming out of the ground and looking upward. And not only did they shoot a ton of B westerns there through the late 40s and through the 1950s, but that was a popular location also for photographers to shoot glamour and pinup photos of attractive young women.
I see.
Yeah.
It hasn't been there for years, right? Corriganville.
Yeah, no, I don't think Corriganville's in existence any longer. That's a whole story for another day. But
I'm thinking it
Crash,
was sold to Bob Hope. I don't know why I think that.
it
But
was.
yeah,
You're right, Rob. Good call.
yeah.
You're totally right. Yeah, Ray Crash Corrigan, the crash happened, unfortunately, but involves, the death of Alfalfa and the Little Rascals, and it gets into a lot of that sort of Hollywood lore, right?
Oh,
But so subsequently, once you moved on, Casey, you didn't really maintain uh, social relationships with people from the film industry.
no,
No?
not at all. Like I say, I made, I don't know, maybe 5 hardcore films, something like that. And then stopped, and subsequently, I'm trying to remember the exact progression. I worked behind a bar for a couple of years. My husband was then out of school, and mostly he got an art degree. We got back together after the, oh, I'm leaving kind of thing. And he was working in construction at the time, so he was making decent money. I worked in a bar. I studied massage for a couple of years and worked as a freelance masseuse for a while. Legitimate, legitimate massage. And then my ex started his own construction business, and I started working for him as his office manager. Well, it started out just doing the payroll and kind of worked more into the business. And then when we separated, I worked with him as his office manager for about 6 years. And then I went to work for another construction company as an office manager. And then finally, during one of the 90s recessions, I was laid off. And after the 1994 earthquake, went to work. Our local state college had been, sorely affected by the earthquake. This was what they called the Northridge earthquake, and this college is in Northridge. So, a lot of the buildings were just totally destroyed. And a lot of the classes were in trailers, mobile trailers. And so I got a job as the art history department secretary, and worked on the campus for about 10 months, which I loved. That was wonderful working in art history. Unfortunately, they had a campus reorganization at the end of the time that I was there, and from the 4 separate art departments that they had, they merged them all into one department. And so, whereas previously they had 4 department secretaries, obviously for one department, you don't need 4 secretaries. And so I got laid off once again, did temp work for about a year, and then went to work for a property management company as the personal assistant to the president. And I worked there for 17 years. And then at age 67, I had planned to work until I was 70 to max out my Social Security. But at age 67, the company lost our biggest client. And so I was laid off after 17 years. And of course, I'm 67, nobody's going to hire me. at that age. So I retired. But I found after I had been retired for a very short time that I really, 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 really loved it. Not having any
Right.
money is that part is, not quite so fun, but not working. That was great.
It suits you.
I bet.
Going back in the other direction,
I'm jealous.
What did you do after high school? And did you study anything in high school that helped you in acting?
Well, actually, in junior high and high school, I did study speech and drama. And in high school, I did do, several things with the drama department that were shown to the school. I was never official in an official school play because you had to have what was it? I don't know, 2 years, something. You had to have so much drama class before you could be in the school play. And I was taking college prep courses. And so you only have so many electives. And, I couldn't squeeze in all the, so I was several times in noon play kind of things that they would put on in the auditorium. And then I think by my senior year, I could have been in the play, but they were doing Hamlet. And so I said I wanted to audition to play Hamlet, and they wouldn't let me. I would have been awful. I mean, they should have just let me and said, well, thank you. We'll get back to you. We'll let you know. We're seeing other actors. But no, they wouldn't do that. So
you were just before your time, someone might have been hip to it a few years later.
There's a little Hamlet. I think there's a little Hamlet in all of us. I don't think any of us can actually get a Hamlet. I was joking. It's funny you mentioned that, Casey, because I was joking with Rob rather facetiously a few hours ago via email and joking about Hamlet and Shakespeare and about how I'll say it, how we could take all of Shakespeare's whole entire body of work and we could rewrite it and set it in the late 1960s and early 1970s during the rise of the adult industry involving the mafia and things like that. Characters like Fat Jack. Yeah, I have a bad sense of humor. Right?
Heaven forbid.
Yeah. Except you'll execute it.
Oh no.
We'll see.
So after
he puts his mind to something,
after high school, I did my elder sister, who had been in Macbeth, actually, her senior year. She was one of the witches in Macbeth. But she was involved for a while with some sort of a community theater kind of group. And so I would hang out kind of around this group of people when they would be at our house rehearsing, whatever. And I think at some point in time, they did give me some minor part in whatever they were putting together. And then the whole troupe just kind of fell apart. So, okay. So I went to college just for a semester and a half, and I got some sort of hideous virus. That they never would give a specific name to. But I was in bed for several months, so I had to drop out of school. They kept telling me it wasn't mono, but then my boyfriend at the time, who was off in Germany in the army, came home on leave and went back to Germany and told me I had given him mono. So apparently, after seeing me, he got sick, and that's what they told him it was. And so I don't know whether it was the doctors here or the Army doctors who were in error, but I had to drop out of college, and in theory, I could have gone back. But at that point in time, my father had lost his business. And there was very little, well, he was working, but there was very little money around at that point. So I took a job working in an Indian import store. And I worked there, I think, for about a year. And then I got a job at the phone company, which was a nightmare. Let me tell you, they were such a big brother sort of company.
And that was back when it was Ma Bell, right? They had the monopoly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it was Pacific Telephone Company, which became AT&T, part of AT&T. But no, they were terrible. They were terrible. I did work there for 2.5 years until I just couldn't take it anymore. And that's how I ended up getting into the whole modeling thing. I quit my job very impulsively, and so just kept looking through the want ads for job opportunities, and I saw an ad for nude models. So I figured, well, what the hell? That's probably a job I could get, except it doesn't last very long. So,
and then the rest was history.
There you go. That photographer who was out here in the Valley put me in touch with Jack, who became my first agent. And he's the one who eventually got me into films, because I did print modeling for a while. And he said, well, you're just overshot now. It's like they can't use, everybody has hundreds of photographs, which apparently are still surfacing. They just can't use anymore. So then he pointed me in the film direction.
Yeah, unlike Ed Wood, you couldn't just change your name, have a new moniker for another story in the same magazine.
Hard to do that, yes.
That's right. That's how he kept from being overexposed, as being a one-man operation.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So Casey, go ahead, Greg.
Well, no, I wanted to ask, I know at that point, it reminds me at that particular point in time, you mentioned starting to dance in bars, right? And
No.
No?
The films that I was doing were shown in topless bars.
Gotcha. Okay. I stand corrected. Because it made me think there's a film, and I haven't seen it yet, and I don't want to, it's somebody else's film who they've discovered, but a film which you were reputedly in, which takes place, and the setting is mud wrestling. Do you have any recollection whatsoever of mud wrestling?
I'm sure that's not me.
Okay.
Mud wrestling, my memory of a lot of that stuff is pretty hazy, but I'm sure I would remember mud wrestling.
I figured, that's why I wanted to ask. I'm sorry if I'm asking rather off the wall questions.
If you ever do get around to seeing it,
yeah.
And I actually am in this film, Mud Wrestling, please let me know. I will.
Sure.
I'll start taking one of those medications, for older people who are losing their minds. Oh no.
So Casey, how do you see LA? You're a child of LA. You've lived there your whole life.
Yes.
How do you feel about LA over all these decades?
Oh dear. Well, my my experience for the most part of Los Angeles has been pretty suburban. The first house I lived in was in the city, not too far from Culver City, I guess, in what at the time was sort of an upper middle class neighborhood. My brother, years later, toured by various places he'd lived in Los Angeles, and he said that area was now a war zone. It's like boarded up windows, graffiti all over the place. It just, had completely, totally gone downhill. But we moved to the San Fernando Valley when I was 8 years old, to a street that was not paved. We had a dirt road in front of our house. I think we lived there for 4 years. I think during that time, I think the street was paved. But there were a lot of rural aspects. So after 4 years, the state bought our home, eminent domain, because they were building the 405 freeway.
Oh, wow.
Which was just a couple of blocks. Our street was just parallel, just a couple of blocks from where they put up the freeway. So then we moved to Woodland Hills, very nice suburban neighborhood. At that point in time, the Ventura Freeway stopped in Woodland Hills, stopped in the town where I lived. The freeway just ran out. No more freeway. Okay. So you can tell this was a long, long time ago. And then my father lost his business, and then we moved to another place in Woodland Hills, a funky little house that was built out of railroad ties. No insulation or all this railroad ties. Okay. Kind of a cool little house. And then after several years, I moved away from home into an apartment, also in the West San Fernando Valley. And from there, started living with my future husband and moved up to Box Canyon. So I haven't, even though I was born in Hollywood, and spent a fair amount of time working in Hollywood, very suburban. So in terms of how the city has changed, I know just from going to Hollywood Boulevard, whatever, where you used to have all of these wonderful old funky record shops and movie memorabilia places, posters and costume shops and all that sort of stuff. Then years later, I would go there and it was just bars, sleazy bars and tattoo parlors and stuff like that. Apparently they've cleaned it up now, but I don't really spend a lot of time there. I do go to the Hollywood Bowl, which is very close by. I love it there. But over the years, of course, the whole area just got more and more and more crowded, and smoggier and smoggier. Although I will say, in terms of the air quality, they cleaned that up quite a bit, since all the emissions control legislation and stuff, that has helped a great deal. I'm sure we still don't have the best air quality in the world. Well, part of it is the geology of the area. That it just, in a place like San Francisco, in an area like where you are, you have so many wonderful ocean breezes, things that just carry things away. And here, right, it sort of settles into a little bowl. Hard to get rid of it.
Yeah, we do have something. Yeah, the wind will come through the ocean, and I'm in San Francisco Bay Area, and it'll blow it out occasionally. Although it's much worse than when I was a kid. it's definitely, even though you had mentioned, we have catalytic converters now and all that kind of
Right.
stuff, but the population in the Northern California has grown so much that the smog is much worse than it was when I was a kid. But it's funny you mentioned the freeways, because I remember being a kid in the 70s having to drive a few miles to get to the freeway before they built on ramps or the freeways continued onwards. And so I kind of got that sense when you were explaining that with the urban
Right.
sprawl, how it changes areas that were a lot different earlier on.
Yes, yes, and yes. I must say, however, I have always really, really appreciated Los Angeles for just sort of being an insane kind of place. They talk about Hollywood being a dream factory, but I've always thought of Los Angeles in general as being a place where you can just be anything. You can do anything, you can imagine anything. It's just, I used to go up to San Francisco to visit a very, very, very dear friend of mine. And I would go out around her neighborhood to various little shops, wine shops, whatever, to buy this or that. And I noticed that there was really a we mentality about people who lived in the city. Oh, we don't do this, or we don't like that, or we don't, it's like, and that's one of the things that I like about LA. There is no we mentality. We can like whatever we want. So I don't know. One of my goddaughters years ago came to stay with me for a little while. And we were out driving on one of the freeways one day, and she said, "Why do you live here?" She was 20 or something at the time. I don't know. I said, "Well, I like it. Where do you think I should live?" Now, of course, our weather has gotten rather more insane in terms of the heat, and
the wildfires and the winds.
Well, the fires are all over California now. Yeah. I live actually in a very windy Chatsworth, where I am, the whole North San Fernando Valley, there tends to be a lot of wind, which I hate personally, but the sunny weather, I mean, we've had, as I know you have as well, have had such a horribly wet winter, and seen so little sun. I just get really depressed. Like, oh no, we've had some sunny days now, but of course, the flip side of that is that it can get really, 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 really hot. The last several summers, was it last summer? There was one that, admittedly, just one day, where it was 117 here.
Yeah, I forget what they called it, the heat dome. The hit came down from like the northwest.
I don't know, but that's brutal. But then the next day was 108. So
a break.
But we've definitely had many more days over 100 degrees. And I now don't have a car, so I either have to walk to places or take the bus. And when it's 110 degrees, walking to do your grocery shopping can get sort of brutal.
Sure. So no more motorbikes.
I can't imagine, guys. I mean, I'm on the East Coast, so I said before we started recording, yeah, it's in the high 70s here today. That's like sweltering around here. So I can't even fathom 100 degrees, let alone 117 degrees. That seems
well, that was
beyond
a real
my comprehension. Yeah.
Hopefully, hopefully that was an
Right.
aberration.
Right. Yes, we'll keep our
Well,
fingers
we've
crossed.
had such a crazy wet winter here. Well, like you say, Rob, not only wet, but windy. We had a tornado in Monrovia a couple of 2 weeks ago. There was a tornado. Like, oh my
Yeah,
God.
definitely crazy weather. And yeah,
But
we
there's
lost a lot
no
of
such
trees.
thing as climate change, no such thing. Yeah, right.
What's that? Right. That begs a whole other topic, perhaps
Oh,
for
sorry.
another day. No, it does. It does, because it's
Sorry
something
to
that
digress.
no,
It
Casey,
just,
because it's something we didn't delve into, but you've been very politically active your entire adult life.
well, I don't know entire, but I have at various times, yes, been politically active. In the early 70s, I was very active in the feminist movement, campaigning for abortion rights and the ERA and stuff like that.
And here we are again.
And here we are again. Yes. Oh no. God, what is their problem? I mean, Jesus. I keep just I just keep wanting women to go through the whole Sparta thing all over again, and say, okay, you asshole Republicans, no sex for you, we can't do what we want about our own pregnancies, no sex for you, if you get a vasectomy, maybe we'll think about it, but aside from that, no sex for you.
It's the plot line of a really great novel from the mid 1970s by Thomas Berger. I can't remember I fear to say I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but that's essentially the plot line. So yes, it should become not more than fiction. It should become, again, we try, Casey, we try not to get too political here.
Oh, sorry.
Here around the Edward Summit podcast. No. I'm with you. I'm with you 1,000+%. I think Rob is as well, not to speak for him, but yeah, we're all on the same page as far as all that travesty goes. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, as you say, you're able to do some editing, so
Yeah.
Whatever. I step over any lines,
It's okay.
I can't be trusted. Definitely can't be trusted.
Transgression is a good thing, right? That's how we grow. So I think we've really berated you with quite a few questions for at great length here, and I appreciate it more than you know, Casey. I'd like to say there's so many other things I think we could probably talk about, and perhaps you'll join us another day. I think I would certainly enjoy that. I think again, not to speak for Rob, but he would be up for that as well. But is there anything you guys wanted to, before I wrap a bow on this wonderful conversation, is there anything you guys wanted to touch on or bring up before we
Well, I'm just wondering, Rob, since you're relatively close by, if you ever come to LA.
I'd be happy to pay you a visit. Sure. Now that the pandemic is kind of kept me cooped up for a while, but that would be a pleasure.
Way too long. Yes, way too long. Actually, at this point, I'm one of the few people that I know now who has not gotten it.
I'm in that same boat.
Yay. Yay. Well, I will say I've been very careful. I mean, I'm, fully drugged up, but I never go out in public without my mask. Not only for my own sake, but I have an 81-year-old, very frail sister. And so, but you should truly let me know if you're ever going to be in the area for a little while. Actually, this Friday, do you guys know the Spicers? Ashley and April?
I do.
Okay. I'm having lunch with them this Friday.
Oh, cool. Well, definitely. I've spoken to Ashley a few times, don't know him well, but definitely tell him I said hello.
Okay. I'll do that. I mean, I don't know them at all, but they do a lot of research, I guess, into the same film era that you guys do. And they sent me a Christmas card a couple of years ago now and said, oh, we'd love to talk to you and stuff. They told me that their emphasis is not so much on the films themselves as on the performers.
Right.
Who made the films. So they're just in Los Angeles, I guess, on vacation this week. And so they said, let's do lunch.
And it's since you mentioned it, to plug their site, Casey's referring to the rialtoreport.com, which if you're an aficionado of vintage adult films from the late 60s into the hardcore era and beyond, the rialtoreport.com is probably a site you're extremely familiar with, as you should be. They've done a lot of really heroic research for sure.
Uh-huh. Well, I'll tell them you said hi.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Rob, anything additional you wanted to mention?
I don't think so. I think I kind of touched on all the little nuggets that she and I had discussed before that I wanted to bring to light. So, yeah.
Cool.
Well, it's lovely to meet you in person, sort of, sort of in person. Okay.
Again,
talking to you again.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you both. Thank you tremendously. This has been a great experience for me, and hopefully for those of you out there at the Edward Summit who watch the Edward Summit podcast, I'm sure you recognized, what a really privileged experience this was to have someone here who works so closely with Ed and has been so forthcoming and sharing so many great stories. So everybody, have yourselves a wonderful tomorrow or evening or morning or whatever comes next for you. And thanks for coming, and we'll be back and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.